Injuries in sports are common. They can range from being very minor to career-threatening, or in some rare cases, life-threatening. There is one organization that you wouldn't think had injuries, and that would be professional wrestling. Yes, you heard me right. There are injuries in wrestling. I can hear some of you out there now. Wrestling is scripted, predetermined. These guys don't get hurt. Well, they do. In this documentary, I will be explaining to you all that injuries are real in professional wrestling. So, this will be called Injuries in Pro Wrestling. Let's begin. Professional wrestling has been around for several decades, and in those decades, there have been numerous wrestlers that have gotten injured. Now, I'm not going to go over every wrestler that has gotten injured, but I am going to go over a big handful of wrestlers. So I'm going to start in the 1990s. Here we go. On an episode of Raw on October 9th, 1995, after a six-man tag team match involving Shawn Michaels, Diesel, and The Undertaker losing to Owen Hart, British Bulldog, and Yokozuna, King Mabel came into the ring and ambushed Undertaker. Mabel was supposed to give Taker a clothesline, but instead miscalculated and The Undertaker colliding with Mabel's fist, resulting in 90% of his orbital floor being crushed. For the next 2 months, he wore a Phantom of the Opera-like mask. At SummerSlam 1997, Stone Cold Steve Austin suffered a severe neck injury after a tombstone piledriver had gone wrong that was performed by Owen Hart. Hart dropped Austin on his head, resulting in a bruised spinal cord and temporary paralysis. Even though Austin won the match, he had to be helped to the back by the referees and paramedics. Due to his injury, Austin was forced to vacate the Intercontinental title and one half of the WWE Tag Team titles. He would return to action over a month later. At the Royal Rumble in 1998, Shawn Michaels injured his lower back during a WWE title casket match involving himself and The Undertaker. During the match, Taker lifted Michaels over the top rope, and as he came down, his lower back hit the side of the casket, causing one disc to be crushed and 2 discs to urinate. Shawn won the match, but was forced to miss No Way Out the following month and would wrestle at WrestleMania 14 in March before going on a 5-year temporary retirement. In June of the same year, both Mankind and The Undertaker were injured during a Hell in a Cell match at King of the Ring. During the match, Undertaker suffered a broken bone in his foot, but Mankind suffered the worst injuries. At the start of the match, both men began the match at the top of the cell. About 5 to 10 minutes in, Undertaker threw Mankind off the side of the cell, crashing through the announce tables. Mankind was then put on a gurney and started to get wheeled to the back. But despite his injuries, Mankind got off the gurney and climbed back up the cell. The Undertaker then proceeded to chokeslam Mankind at the top of the cell. But suddenly, the cell gave way and Mankind fell into the ring, resulting in even more injuries. After the match, Mankind suffered a concussion, a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, bruised ribs, internal bleeding, puncture wounds, and 1.5 missing teeth. Mankind would be out of action for 2.5 months before returning back to the ring. On an episode of SmackDown in October 1999, Darren Drozdov suffered a severe neck injury during a match against D'Lo Brown. During the match, D'Lo attempted to do his finisher, called the Lowdown, which is a sit-down powerbomb. However, D'Lo couldn't get a good grip on Droz due to his loose clothing, and Droz was dropped on his head, fracturing 2 vertebrae in his neck. And since then, Droz has been quadriplegic. In January 2000, Eddie Guerrero suffered an injury during a match with Perry Saturn against the New Age Outlaws. Eddie was going for his signature move, the Frog Splash, but as he landed, he dislocated his elbow in the process and was sidelined for several weeks. A month later, at No Way Out, Billy Gunn suffered an injury during a tag team match with his partner the Road Dogg against the Dudley Boys. He tore his rotator cuff during the match and he was sidelined until October. Now this next injury I'm about to show you is very graphic and very disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. In January 2001, at the WCW pay-per-view called Sin, Sid Justice, or Psycho Sid, suffered a horrific injury during a four corners match that involved himself, Scott Steiner, Jeff Jarrett, and Road Warrior Animal. Sid went for a big boot off the second rope, but as he came down, he put all his weight on his left foot, snapping his fibula and tibia. Sid went out of action indefinitely. At Judgment Day 2001, Rikishi suffered a dislocated shoulder injury while wrestling with William Regal. He went out of action until October of that same year. The next night on Raw, Triple H suffered an injury while wrestling in a tag match that involved himself, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Chris Benoit, and Chris Jericho. While Chris Jericho had Austin in his submission hold, Triple H hit Jericho from behind to break the hold, but in the process, Triple H tore his left quadricep muscle and was kept out of action for 8 months. A few days later, on SmackDown, Chris Benoit injured his neck during a TLC tag team match. He would wrestle with the injury until the King of the Ring the following June, but after that match at King of the Ring, he would have neck surgery and would go out of action for over a year. In March 2002, Kevin Nash suffered a biceps injury during a match on Raw and was kept out of action until July, but upon returning, he tore his quadricep during a tag team match and was once again out of action, but this time was out for 9 months. In February 2003, Edge suffered a neck injury stemming from a bump he took during a match with Eddie Guerrero on SmackDown in September 2002. Over the course of several months, the injury caught up to Edge, and eventually he would have surgery and didn't return until over a year later. In January 2003, both Batista and Randy Orton sustained injuries during a live event match against the Dudley Boys. Batista tore his tricep during that match, while Orton suffered a broken foot. Now, Batista was only set to be out of action for a few months, but before his return would tear his tricep again and was kept out of action until October of 2003. At WrestleMania 19, both Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle suffered injuries during their WWE Championship match. Brock Lesnar suffered a concussion after a shooting star press had gone wrong, and Kurt Angle suffered a stinger in his neck. Kurt was sidelined for some weeks, but Brock Lesnar showed up to SmackDown that following Thursday. On the April 4th, 2005 edition of Raw, Randy Orton suffered a shoulder injury during a match with Batista. Orton's shoulder hit the ring post twice, and therefore resulting it being broken, and Randy was kept out of action until June. At New Year's Revolution in January 2007, Triple H suffered a quadricep injury in his right leg during a match involving himself, Shawn Michaels, Edge, and Randy Orton. The match itself went to a no contest, and soon after, Triple H had surgery and was kept out of action until August. In October, John Cena suffered a torn pectoral muscle during his match with Mr. Kennedy and was kept out of action until January 2008. At One Night Stand in 2008, Randy Orton suffered a broken collarbone injury during the match against Triple H, and he was kept out of action until September. Now this next one is not a match-related injury per se, but more of a stem injury from years earlier. After WrestleMania 27, Edge announced his retirement from wrestling after feeling numbness in his arms, going back to his neck injury from 2003. After his retirement, Edge had triple fusion neck surgery, and after a 9-year retirement, Edge returned to the ring at the Royal Rumble in 2020. In June 2014, on an episode of SmackDown, Wade Barrett separated his shoulder during a Money in the Bank qualifying match against Jack Swagger and was kept sidelined for several months. On the July 27, 2015 edition of Raw, John Cena suffered a broken nose during a U.S. title match against Seth Rollins. A few months later, at Night of Champions, Sting suffered a neck injury during a WWE title match against Seth Rollins. Rollins went for a buckle bomb on Sting in the corner, but Sting's neck snapped back against the turnbuckle and caused him to collapse. Sting temporarily retired soon after. At the Payback pay-per-view in 2016, Enzo Amore suffered a concussion during a match that involved Big Cass and the Vaudevillains. Simon Gotch, who was a member of the team, was supposed to throw Enzo under the bottom rope out of the ring, but Enzo's head connected with the bottom rope and ring mat, knocking him unconscious. The match was rendered a no contest, and Enzo returned a month later. At SummerSlam a month later, Finn Balor suffered a shoulder injury during the inaugural Universal title match against Seth Rollins. Rollins went for a buckle bomb on Balor on the barricade, but ended up suffering a labrum tear. Despite winning the match, Balor was forced to relinquish the title the next night on Raw. He had successful surgery and was out of action for 4 to 6 months. On an episode of Raw in August 2017, Big Cass suffered a torn ACL injury during a match with his former partner Enzo. He would require surgery and went out of action for 8 months. In March 2022, Big E suffered a scary neck injury during a match with his New Day partners against Sheamus and Ridge Holland. Holland was going for a belly-to-belly suplex on Big E on the outside ring mat, but Big E ended up landing on his head, fracturing his C1 and C6 vertebrae. Big E was immediately rushed to the hospital after the match. He has been out of action ever since, and is unsure of when he will return to the ring. So there you go. That goes to show you, you can get seriously injured in wrestling. Even if you rehearse your moves and holds, things can go wrong. Hope you enjoyed this dark documentary. If you did, please give it a like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want me to do more dark documentaries, I will. See you guys next time.